Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. I love magic, the sleight of hand, misdirection, the wonder. I love its affinity with cons and deception. Ricky Jay was an historian of every one of those topics, as well as a master himself at sleight of hand and cards. He was instrumental to the movie House of Games, in which a con man explains to a mark, "It's called a confidence game. Why? Because you give me your confidence? No. Because I give you mine." Which means this week we chat with Adrian Sanabria about the things that lead to myths and lies in Infosec and why they're harmful to the industry's advancement. In the news segment, aviation ASCII art that's awesome, a double free that might not be terrible, a format string that might be terrible, a framework that's new, code that's secure, and more. Pick a card and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
UFOs are everywhere. That's right. UFOs, unidentified file objects, are hiding in files in your cloud apps and storage. UFOs can contain malware that exfiltrates data or deploys ransomware. 70% of UFOs in files can't be detected or prevented by traditional scanning solutions like antivirus and sandboxing. That's where Vetero comes in. Vetero prevents UFOs before they hitch a ride in on files in the cloud, without detection and without slowing down business. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Vetero. That's VOTIRO. Imperva is the comprehensive digital security leader on a mission to help organizations protect their data and all paths to it. Only Imperva protects all digital experiences, from business logic to APIs, microservices, the data layer, and from vulnerable legacy environments to cloud-first organizations. With an integrated approach combining network, application, and data security, Imperva protects companies ranging from cloud-native startups to global multinationals with hybrid infrastructure. Start a free trial today and quickly protect your web applications at securityweekly.com/Imperva. This is episode 228, recorded February 6, 2023. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Hello, host Mike Shima. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm also here with the Three of Clubs. And an announcement, because who knows if it even works anymore, but if you're not a bot or an API call, you can follow us on Twitter for live stream reminders, highlighted clips, memes, and more. Find us at Sec Weekly. Adrian is a successful generalist with over 2 decades of experience hacking, fixing, breaking, building, and teaching in Infosec. He's always trying to see the big picture and figure out the best strategy. Despite all these years in the industry, he is still optimistic about our future. Hello, Adrian. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. Great to be a guest.
We've had you as a co-host on episodes 143 and 181, but yes, you are a guest today because you got me really excited about the topic of your talk last month at Enigma, Myths and Lies in Infosec. And I think there's going to be a lot to unpack, but I want to start this off with just how long have you been thinking about this topic? This can't be just something that, 2022 made you start worrying about Infosec.
I think my first Twitter rants about this topic probably go back 6 or 7 years, at least 6 or 7 years. And that's really when the research started. So it's been a pretty steady research project for a while. And that, I might be dipping too deep in too early, but that list of companies that have been destroyed by a breach, I started that about 6 years ago.
Yeah, and yes, and we'll get to that percentage. But before we do, there's also, I thought it was just interesting about the research you did. This isn't just a diatribe of Adrian the curmudgeon. There's some research. You're going and digging into where a lot of this came from, but there's also why you did this too. It's fun to talk about myths, mistakes, stats that go wrong, but you had some really good examples of why this is important for Infosec. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I don't just rant. I rant with data. All right, I bring data to my my fights. But yeah, I think it's and it's interesting. I was watching the latest The Last of Us episode last night, and
ooh, yes.
once it was done, I wanted to watch something else, so I went back and started to rewatch Chernobyl, which has the same showrunners as The Last of Us, which is the reason I started watching The Last of Us, because Chernobyl was really good. And there's this there's this very short speech that's given at the very beginning of the first episode where it starts off with what's the cost of lies. And it's a great. I heard that, I paused it immediately, transcribed it, and that's going in the next version of this talk that I give. But it's the long and short of it is it begins to get difficult to tell the difference between the truth and lies, and it kind of wears people out. Like every individual can't be expected to have to go fact check everything that they hear. I mean, if you're giving a big talk, or if you're putting together a sales deck that you're going to use 800 times, absolutely you should do the fact check, right? But if you're sharing a tweet or something that you read in a book or something like that, like it's just exhausting to look up everything all the time. But I want to make people aware of it, because if you find out you've been telling repeating a myth or a lie for the last 5 years, like where do you go from there? Do you and it's interesting because some people double down on it. So I talk about the sunk cost fallacy, and some people are very apologetic, and then they get very nervous about sharing anything after that, which it's good to have some skepticism, but credibility is important. One of the points I make in the talk is our industry is really young. We're not a professionalized industry. So we're already, and I think a lot of the things that we've been saying for years, that you better get security right, or the end times are coming, they haven't come, and I've got the data to show that they're probably not going to come. So I think we've cried wolf too many times, and repeating these myths and lies doesn't help our case.
Yeah, and there's, not to overanalyze, but there can be some self-aggrandation too, in the sense that we're defending the world against, trillions and trillions of dollars of losses, or horrible attacks and cyber Pearl Harbors and Armageddons and 911s and other, metaphors. But we also, some of the harms you're talking about, well, let's start to pick on some of the concrete points you pick up too. You mentioned, attackers, speaking of defending ourselves, attackers only have to be right once, defenders, or I already said it backwards. See, why don't you tell us what it is?
Yeah, so there's a lot of demotivational maxims in security. Yeah. So it's very natural to use fear, uncertainty, and doubt to sell security, and some of those, we've had some maxims grow out of it. So there's a bunch of different variations of this. There's the attacker only has to get it right once. The defender has to get it right every time, which sounds good. Like, especially if you're looking for a good soundbite for something, and this is where the confirmation bias comes in. If you're trying to sell security, these maxims sound great. They're scary. They're going to make you wary. But when you actually start to analyze it and think about it, once the attacker gets that initial foothold, sure, they just have to find one foothold, but then they're on your turf. You can have honey tokens and honey pots, and it's like call it the Home Alone effect. Now you're on their turf. They can have all kinds of traps and things to trip you up, and detections and alarms and stuff like that for the attacker to trip into. Now the attacker has to get it right every time, and the defender only has to catch them once to know that they're in the environment and to boot them out. Now that doesn't happen as often as I think it should, but the potential's there. Defenders can do all that preparation. We don't do it enough, but
absolutely. It's that idea of, as you said, tripping those alerts. You just trip one once, and hopefully, that observant SOC is going to capture them. It's similar to speaking of the honey and honey, and whatnot. It's like don't have to outrun the bear is my annoyed version of that type of statement. It's like there's a lot of like cyber bears out there scanning everything. It's not like there's just one you need to run from. So that was one example of kind of that demotivational aspect. And you've talked about credibility too. And I'm just going to kind of lead us into some of those other areas. I alluded to losing, I think you said you had a quote, cybercrime will cost the world $10.5 trillion annually by 2025. I've looked at, our latest, market sponsorship for ASW and the budgets of a couple different organizations. I don't think they hit the $1 trillion mark. We might be a couple orders of magnitude below that.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting is for the first time, thanks to cryptocurrency, we do have some insight into how much money is being paid to attackers in the case of ransoms. And ransom is it's certainly not all of the damages. Like those are direct costs, right? Those are direct damages. That doesn't count any lawsuits against you, any fines you have to pay or anything like that. So clearly it's not all of it, but it is a portion that we can see really well, like down to the penny. And it actually dropped 40% last year and never quite hit $1 billion. I think 2021 was the worst that ransom payments had been, or the most ransom payments that had been spent. And there's been many studies on the damages, considering both direct costs and indirect costs. Mm-hmm. And none of them can get anywhere, like you say, an order of magnitude. They can't get within even an order of magnitude of these claims, of these $1 trillion claims.
Yeah, and what I love about that is that you're starting to now show data, like where can we infer, where are some proxy variables or indicators that say ransomware. We've all seen the fines that the FCC can drop or the FTC can drop onto companies. And one of the other things where you started to dive into data, looking for where do these come from, was I think perhaps one of your favorite stats about, was it 60% of small businesses will go out of business 6 months after your presentation. So come July, let's see what happens to those small businesses.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one that really inspired me to start tracking the number of companies that have actually gone out of business due to a breach. And yeah, so I actually, in an earlier version of this presentation, because at Usenix Enigma, it's like a TED style talk, so it's very short. So I had to cut out a lot of stuff. And I actually had, I'm pulling it up now, I actually had some stats on that. Like if that were true, the number of businesses that would be going under is it's in the order of hundreds a year, hundreds of small businesses a year. Yeah, I can't find the exact stat, but yeah, it's huge. It's like it would be in the news literally every other day. We'd be hearing about some business going under. And it's really all small businesses. The only ones that have gone under due to a breach. Yeah, I don't know when you want to get to that number. I'll let you tell it. But yeah, it's the moment you start looking into the numbers, none of it makes sense. And already, I think the thing that sets off everybody's spider sense when they hear that stat is like, within 6 months of a breach, like so much stuff can happen to a small business within 6 months. Like most small businesses don't make it, right? Like I think a third of small businesses don't hit the 2-year mark. So like 6 months is huge. Like they could be going out of business for any number of reasons. How do you nail it down to the fact that they had a breach 6 months ago? Like maybe it's just because it's not a good business or it's the 11th cupcake shop in the neighborhood. It's like there's a million reasons, before the breach they had 6 months ago that they might be going out of business.
Yeah, an excellent point too about that tying into a little bit of skepticism. Where's the correlation, or where's some of the causal indicators that show that's the direct effect? But there's also another aspect of that too, is just how do those, how does 60% keep getting, 60% of small businesses out of business because of a hack? How's that keep being repeated over and over and over again? Because I think that's what you said, 6 or 7 years you've been tracking that.
Yeah, and that stat it emerged in 2011, and a guy over at NextGov, a journalist over there, actually hunted it down and tracked it to a single person, an individual source, who when he interviewed him, admitted he doesn't know where the stat came from. He says he thinks some InfoSec expert told it to him, but he doesn't remember who. So clearly it was just made up. It was just something that sounded good, maybe came out of his mouth, maybe without malintent. Maybe he did think he heard it somewhere. And that's, there's some great books if you read like The Invisible Gorilla or You're Not So Smart that go into why our brains work this way. Like a lot of information comes in and it comes out all twisted around. And that's why everybody's always accusing each other of gaslighting, right? Because things just get mixed up in our minds. We get a lot going on, more and more input hitting our brains every day. We can't remember who said this quote, so we say it was Samuel Clemens. Everything gets attributed to like 3 people in history, all the big quotes, and there's even a website for that, Quote Investigator, that does what I do for security, but for quotes, and tries to hunt down in publications and literature and newspapers, who actually said these things. And
I guess one of the questions for me about this, Adrian, is okay. It's I've I had it in a tab here. It's between this talk. There's a ton of great stuff in it. Everyone should listen to it when it comes out. And like you did that keynote back at Virus Bulletin in London a few years ago, which I'm always quoting to people. We know it's a problem. You're shining a very, very bright, very clear spotlight on it. But how do we get the industry to change?
Yeah. So, I mean, certainly they need to be recognized as I think one of the things is you need something better than maybe a talk of mine or a tweet of mine. There needs to be a more official source you can point to. Like this is something that was really useful back in the day, that attrition.org, if you've been in the industry for a long time, Jericho over at and the other folks at Attrition maintained a page, a list of charlatans in the industry, who basically their whole shtick was telling lies, and did a really good job of documenting everything. Here's why they're a charlatan, here's specific examples. And that was a place where you could point to and do that. So that's something I'm actually working on right now, is setting up a website that really just houses all the research I've done over the years and links to all the talks I've done over the years and all the writing that I've done, because it's scattered all over the place now. Some of those websites don't exist anymore, and I've got to go to the Wayback Machine to dig them up. So I think having kind of like an official source, with all the references and all the research that I've done, is going to help people in a tactful way say, hey, we shouldn't be using this stat. Check out this link. Here's why. So then it's not them saying it. They're not the bad guy going to marketing and saying, hey, we need to pull this off of our website or out of our sales deck. They can then point to me and I can be the bad guy, right? Like they can get angry at me and I don't work for them. So, it makes it a little bit easier, I think, to, I talk to a ton of people. They're like, yeah, my company uses that stat and I hate it, but I don't know what I can do about it.
I mean, I guess the grizzled security guy here, and I know all of us are grizzled, unfortunately, on this podcast right now, but is that going to have enough of a change? I mean,
grizzling is a side effect of working in security.
Yeah, but where I was going is as, and it's not just InfoSec. If you look at security in general, or even
absolutely not. Yeah,
governments, we tend to sell to people through FUD, and as long as you're in that mindset of like, ooh, look behind that door, there's a guy who's going to get you. How do we get away from that? I mean, that's I don't know if it's possible, but
Yeah,
there's an area. Go ahead.
I think using the data in a smart way, like just to give an example, somebody has a breach. You don't want to be emailing people the very next day saying we would have stopped that breach. Kind of the ambulance chasing thing.
Ambulance chasing.
I know a lot of buyers in the industry that will blacklist companies for that kind of behavior because it's so distasteful. But maybe a month after the breach happens, you publish a blog where you have this nice kind of detailed analysis of what went wrong, step by step, how things could have been prevented, like a very thoughtful blog post. Because oftentimes the day after a breach happens, we don't even have all the details. Yeah. When Equifax got hacked, that House subcommittee report didn't come out until 18 months afterwards and had all these great details in it. Sometimes there's a class action lawsuit and the IR report, the mandate report becomes public through the court process. And so it's just a bad idea in general, to kind of jump on these things, to take advantage of current events that cause fear to try and sell your products. Because half the time, what's being reported is going to be wrong anyway. Like, look at the LastPass event in August. They're like, nothing to see here, nothing to worry about. Customers don't need to take any action. And then fast forward from August to December, and it's like, yeah, all of that was taken and some very important fields weren't encrypted. So all of a sudden, everybody's taking action, right? 6 months too late.
Yeah, there's an angle of that, especially this responding to breaches, that I appreciate you bringing up, because it allows me to bring in. I follow the Belfer Center out of Harvard. That's not the important part, but they have a Defending Digital Democracy project where they talk about misinformation, disinformation, how to respond to it. And I have a link to a PDF that I'll have to share about cyber incident communication response takeaways, kind of speaking to what should we do about it, to John's point. And one of the best practices when they talk about cyber incidents is providing context. Be visual. Don't just use text. Speak plainly, because you want to explain to users what should be done. But the first thing they do, or the first reference they say, is be transparent but careful. Public comments should demonstrate that you are taking the issue seriously. But to my mind there, it says you should demonstrate that you're taking this seriously. You shouldn't just say you're taking it seriously. And I think that speaks to, like, the month later, you get a nice write-up.
Actions,
here's our breach report.
Words, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen, we've highlighted, we try to highlight most of the good after action reports, or the breach write-ups about here's what happened, here's what we know, here's when we knew, as well as point out the LastPass issue is a great one of, this wasn't so good. It wasn't transparent. It was vague. And then they had to keep updating it, but they had to update it because they had to walk back some of their statements. Yeah. These are things you don't want to be a position in. And I think too, to come back to what you were talking about, Adrian, as well, there is, you mentioned healthy skepticism, have some data, at least point to data that you can share. I think one of the things too is even in presentations, having references, acknowledging prior work. Yeah. That's another important point you make too. I'm curious, as you were going through even perhaps this presentation or others, are there ways that other references or other sources that you use that are helpful as not necessarily the source of truth, to overuse that phrase, but are more reliable, or that you can demonstrate here's something that we can put more trust in?
Yeah, I think certainly like there's different classes of research, and just to, if I can be permitted a quick plug, we actually did on Enterprise Security Weekly episode number 303, we did an entire segment just on what makes a good breach response, like how to do a good breach response, how not to, because we're constantly reading them and analyzing them, and more often than not, people get them wrong. But yeah, there's certainly different classes of research, and you can tell right away when you open a report, okay, this is a vendor report. Like, they're talking about survey results. They don't even tell you how many respondents there were. They don't tell you the demographics. There's certain things you would expect to see, in more serious research, in a report with more serious research behind it. You'd expect to see a methodology section. And it should be part of the report. It shouldn't be separate, but sometimes it might be separate. Yeah, there should be references to the data. There should be context around the data. This is something I hate in journalism is when you see, oh, Home Depot, settled for $24 million in a lawsuit against them for the breach that they had. Okay, well, is that a lot for Home Depot? Is it a little for Home Depot? Like, what is 24 million?
It's a number.
To my personal finances, sure, 24 million sounds like a lot, but that's not. I'm not the one being sued. I'm not the one paying out the 24 million. And yeah, if you look at the details, Home Depot is a 100 billion plus revenue company. So 24 million is nothing, absolutely nothing. Like that's certainly not enough to change behavior. Certainly not enough for them to, really, feel some pain for having a breach, right? So a good report has to have that context in it. If you're going to throw around stats and numbers, okay, how many survey respondents did you have? Was it 12 people and they're all, employees at your company? Or was it like a well-fielded survey? Surveys are so problematic anyway. If you've got no details behind, the number of people, and even if you're just showing a graph from that, so that's one of the problems you run into is people will use Verizon DBIR stats all the time. They'll pull out this graph, they'll pull out the stat with no context, and
chart crimes.
And that's one of the things, like I remember being at Black Hat and seeing somebody misusing a Verizon data breach stat. And the stat showed the amount of breaches that involved malware. And this was a company that made an anti-malware product, like a next-gen AV product. And somebody had assumed, and again, it's hard to attribute this to malice or just ignorance. But whatever the case, they used it wrong. They assumed that the top of the y-axis on the chart was 100%. And it was actually like 32%. So when you see that line going up near the top of the y-axis, it's leading to like 31%. And they assumed it was like,
oh yes, y-axis shenanigans are that could be manipulated in so many ways.
And so their slide is saying malware happens in 99% of breaches, when it's actually 31%. And Verizon says, hey, if you're going to use any of our stats, please let us know. And they're fantastic. So when I was debunking this before I tweeted, I actually DM'd some of the Verizon data breach guys and said, hey, could you shoot me the actual data on this? And they shot me, like they did a special query just for me, shot me the data. And in less than an hour, I had the correct numbers. That's all it took. Like that's all you had to do to make sure you're using a correct stat or to fact check that stat. And every single time I've done that with them, extremely responsive. They get right back to you.
There's one aspect of that I sort of want to, I'm not making excuses, but for, whatever that segment of our audience is that they're not in the startup space or they haven't worked in small business. I've seen this now at multiple startups where, new product coming out, and this is, again, goes back to your 2019 talk, your keynote, but like new young startup, they're trying to prove to someone that they've got a product that like they spent the last 18, 24 months building this thing. They think it's amazing. Now they got to try and convince others of it. And like, they're just grasping. It's like, if they find something that looks like it's a good number and makes them look good, to be like, hey, look, and like try and get, the cycle starts. But it's like, what, I guess that's sort of what's going on. Just let me leave that as a statement for folks out there who don't know really. It's not always, as Adrian was just saying, maliciousness, whatever else, right? Frequently it's like,
how hard should we judge them? Is that where you're going with this?
No. No. I'm just, that's more of just this is how these things sort of come to be, is what I'm saying. Yeah, but I guess then the second thought, which does turn into the question for conversation, is for those, the 10-person company that's trying to get out there and get these stats and do something, how do we educate them to, this is how you actually go in and do the research or get the stats or, find something which, instead of just grasping for the first number that looks good, figuring out how you actually prove your case? Does that require people to do more statistics classes? Or
Yeah.
Do we need to provide better resources?
So you can pick up some books on journalism and on reporting and statistics and stuff like that, or journalists are tend to be underpaid. So when Andy Ellis was over at Akamai, when he was a CISO of Akamai for 20 years, when he needed somebody to write reports for Akamai, he went and hired some journalists. And they got a big old raise, and they know how to do it correctly. There you go.
Yes, and look at the skills that go into. You mentioned the Verizon DBIR report. That is well written, copy edited. It tells an excellent narrative. It has excellent presentations, and they also are very transparent about. This is we're experimenting with this butterfly chart because we want to show this particular effect or this particular style of it. So they're also very forward about why they're in their choices of these presentations. And I'm highlighting that to reinforce your point. Just because we're an AppSec or Infosec doesn't mean we're experts on every other topic that touches computers. Maybe we should lean on journalists, as you say, or people who write and communicate for a living to help us not only identify the correctness of statements, research the correctness, but also just then to convey them to the audience too.
But I guess going back to the startup example, both of those two methods of correcting this require resources, which the startup doesn't have. And that's I'm not trying to justify. I'm just trying to figure out how do you do it better? Reading a book.
You can outsource it. I mean, the average seed funding is $6 million. You can afford to hire somebody to maybe write the report for you.
I think the average seed funding used to be $6 million.
Well, yeah, maybe a year ago, right? But no, honestly, we're not seeing the funding amounts change. I think it's the number of fundings we're seeing change. So security startup still needs the same amount of money to be successful. I think this is something that we focus on a lot over at ASW. It's just not enough. Not as many of those startups are going to be able to land funding anymore. But yeah, you can go over to Scientia Institute and have them put something together for you. There's some good folks out there that you can outsource this to. But yeah, I mean, and I totally get the fake it till you make it culture. I'm not so much a hard ass that I don't admit that there is a time and place for that. Even some of the organizations, some of the startups with the most integrity I can think of have had to do a little fake it till you make it at some point in the company's history. But with stats and stuff like that, it should not be one of the places that you stretch that like there's a
There could be additional ways to approach that too. There's a difference between also having a reference of what are the cliches or the framing to avoid. And I think you were kind of alluding to setting up a website to collect a lot of here is errata, here are mistakes, so that we don't keep repeating that 60% of small businesses go out of business after a breach. So we don't just always say, attackers only need to get it right once, or humans are the weakest link in security. One of my other pet peeves about cliches or things that may go into marketing to then turn and say, since humans are the weakest link, we now have AI or ML or cascade of if statements that makes things better. So that at least would be one approach, but that's a little bit of a counter things to avoid rather than what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
There's another aspect here I did want to kind of take a sharp turn on, Adrian. You put together this presentation. You've been thinking about it for several years. You've done, as well as a presentation, a very good one about from 2019 that we'll have to also link to, just about the vendor claims, essentially. But where I'm going with this is, you've done a lot of presentations. Give us some insights, perhaps real quick, on just behind the scenes. What does it take to put together to submit to a CFP, put together a good abstract, a good pitch for a presentation like this?
Sure. Yeah. So I think a big common mistake that a lot of people do is they pitch their talk the same way that they would give the talk. In that, like they give you like the sneak peek. but not the meat of the presentation. And the CFP reviewers need that meat of the presentation. They need to see the whole thing. Like that's the time to really to wow them, to not just give them the first 10 minutes of your talk, but the climax of the talk, right? And a lot of people don't do that, and it just doesn't sound like if you don't go for the teaser, because too many times I've seen talks where I'm at a conference, it sounds really exciting from the title. The abstract certainly can be written as a teaser. So every conference should have, when you're doing a CFP, someplace where you can just put notes to the reviewers. It's not going to go in the printed literature. It's not going to go on the website. You can still have the title and the abstract of your talk, not give away, the mic drop moment, right? But you do need that mic drop moment somewhere in there for the reviewers to see and say, okay, yeah, that's worth it. That's pretty good. And a lot of people just leave that out, and there's just not enough details for you to even review the talk. So that's a common mistake that I see people make. But yeah, you've got to be aware of it's almost like a market. You're selling into a market. Is the talk you're submitting, has it been done to death? Has it not been covered at all? Is it something that the reviewers are specifically looking for? You should know all those things. So there's almost some research you should do. Like, if you never go to conferences, you don't know, what's going on. Like I get these all the time from people that there's no way they're in touch with, what's been overdone or not, because it's just immediately like the moment you see it, you're like, yeah, no, this is not it. And also the audience too. You need some understanding of the conference and who the audience is. That's something I've been getting a lot of submissions. B-Sides Knoxville, I run B-Sides Knoxville, and I'm doing some early reviews of the talks that have been submitted so far. And there's several that are specifically targeted towards non-security business executives. None of those are going to come to our conference. That's not a B-Sides crowd. So it's not a talk for us. So instead of just shotgunning your talk out, consider the audience. Is it an AppSec conference? Is it a hacking conference? Like I'm sure like hardware.io gets like, stuff that's completely inappropriate for them, that's just being shotgun blasted over to them. Like you wouldn't want to submit like a GRC talk to hardware, it's right in the name. Like it's all hardware stuff, but I'm sure they get those, and they have to waste their time reading them, and they're going to decline them.
Yeah. Know your content, but as you point out, know your CFP board, who are the reviewers, guide them, and know your audience, so you're going to get a good fit. So you mentioned too that this is, I don't think this is going to be the last time you give this presentation. You're already thinking about what can go into it next. Can you give us a preview of where this might come next, or what might be some new lies or some new myths that might sneak in here?
Yeah. So something I didn't really get into at all are some myths that turn into best practices. I think the term is juice jacking, where like don't use public chargers, is a thing that I've actually seen in corporate policies.
USB is evil.
Yeah. Yes. Like you plug into that charger on the airplane or at the airport or something, like it could give you malware. Zero evidence for any of that ever happening. Like it's just fear. You've just fear that spread and ended up in all kinds of advisories. Like there's been law enforcement advisories on it and stuff like that. I mean, is it possible? Maybe, but have we ever seen it happen? No. In fact, like if you really want to get scared of USB, like there are devices out there that will just destroy your device. Like the moment you plug into them, they're going to send too much power to the device and they'll just wipe it out. And there's very few products that have the proper circuitry to prevent that. And like an Apple MacBook is one. Like they specifically have circuitry that will sacrifice the USB port and not allow that power surge to get through to to the whole electronics. But again, zero evidence of that ever happening. Like, is it possible? Sure. Does it need to be in our acceptable use policies? And like, do we need to be wasting people's time with it? No, not until there's some evidence of people actually trying to do it. I don't really think so. Should our devices be able to prevent malware coming in via USB? Absolutely. And I'm not even up to date on that. I don't know how possible that would be, but I don't think that's not a threat I'm personally worried about. And just stuff like don't use public Wi-Fi, people who only use burners at security conferences as if there's no risk outside of a security conference is something I don't get. Like, I'm much more in favor of just being secure all the time, not just when I'm at DEF CON, So I'm not sure I understand, like sure, maybe turn it up a notch or two when you're at DEF CON, maybe you're just going to put your phone in airplane mode or something like that. But I'm still going to have my normal phone on me, right? Like that's and I've been to a lot of DEF CONs and I've never brought a burner and I've never had a problem.
No, and to me, that would be an indictment of Infosec that if we have to do something special just to go to a conference, we have failed all of our users.
Right.
What are we even doing here?
And the conference organizers go to great lengths to make sure stuff like that doesn't happen because they don't want to scare off their attendees. VPNs are a big one for me. I don't know how some of these VPN providers get away with the claims that they're making, because they're just absolutely not true. Using a VPN will not preserve your privacy on the internet, and it will not keep you safe against sponsored Google links that lead you to malware, which is apparently a thing now.
We're going to have we could go on easily another segment just talking about VPN marketing, as well as CFPs and presentations. We'd love to have you back for some more of that conversation. But I have to leave us with one last question for you, Adrian. We like to pose to all of our guests: how would you describe AppSec in 3 words?
Do input validation. That covers a lot of ground, right?
It totally did. And with that, I do have to say thank you to Adrian for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.
And also John and all of our listeners, to hear more from Adrian, especially about that, I forgot the episode number, but we'll throw it in there, about breachers. 303, thank you.
Yes,
just wait till you get to 404. But you check out Enterprise Security Weekly. Adrian is doing that every single week. Great conversations. And you might even get a peek at John, who shows up every once in a while on there too. And with that, we're going to give Adrian some time to go back to listen to his favorite Fleetwood Mac song, Tell Me Lies. And then we need to go and take a quick break and return with news of the week.